Angels and Demons. Chapter 1. The Hidden Manuscript. Professor John Riley adjusted his glasses as he squinted at the ancient manuscript in front of him. The dim light of the library flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He had spent years researching the mysterious text, believed to be linked to a secret society that had influenced history for centuries. The manuscript, written in a blend of Latin and archaic symbols, was said to contain hidden knowledge about the battle between good and evil. Riley's fingers trembled as he traced the faded ink. "The truth lies in the balance of angels and demons," he muttered, translating the script aloud. He had always been fascinated by the concept of duality, the eternal struggle between opposing forces. His mind raced with possibilities as he delved deeper into the text. Suddenly, a loud noise broke the silence. Riley looked up, his heart pounding. The library was supposed to be empty at this hour. He carefully folded the manuscript and slipped it into his satchel, deciding to investigate the source of the disturbance. As he stepped out into the hallway, he noticed a faint light emanating from one of the study rooms. Riley approached cautiously, peering through the partially open door. Inside, a hooded figure was rifling through stacks of books and papers, clearly searching for something. "Who are you?" Riley demanded, his voice echoing in the stillness. The figure froze, then slowly turned to face him. The hood concealed the person's features, but Riley could feel the intensity of their gaze. Without a word, the intruder bolted towards the exit. Riley gave chase, but the figure was fast, disappearing into the night. Breathing heavily, Riley returned to the study room. The intruder had left behind a trail of papers, and among them, he spotted a small, ornate box. He picked it up, examining the intricate carvings that adorned its surface. The box was locked, but he knew it held a clue to the mystery he was unraveling. Determined to uncover the secrets of the manuscript and the identity of the hooded figure, Riley set out to decode the message hidden within the box. Little did he know, this journey would lead him into a world of ancient conspiracies and a battle between forces far greater than he could ever imagine. Chapter 2. The Unseen Threat. Riley spent the next few days in his office, meticulously examining the box. The carvings seemed to depict a series of events, each more cryptic than the last. He referenced his extensive collection of historical texts, hoping to find a match for the symbols. Despite his efforts, the meaning remained elusive. Frustration mounting, Riley decided to consult an old colleague, Dr. Isabella Marconi, a renowned expert in symbology. He contacted her and arranged a meeting at her office in Rome. With the box safely tucked away, he boarded a flight, anxious to share his findings. Upon arriving in Rome, Riley was greeted by the bustling cityscape, a stark contrast to the solitude of his library. He made his way to Dr. Marconi's office, located in a historic building near the Vatican. As he approached the entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Dr. Marconi welcomed him warmly, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the box. "This is remarkable, John," she said, carefully inspecting the carvings. "I've seen similar symbols in texts related to the Knights Templar and other secret societies." Riley nodded. "I believe it's connected to a manuscript I found. It speaks of a balance between angels and demons, and I think this box holds the key to understanding it." Marconi's expression grew serious. "If that's true, we're dealing with something incredibly dangerous. The Templars were known for guarding powerful secrets, and there are those who would kill to possess this knowledge." As they worked together to decode the symbols, Riley couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the courtyard below. "Isabella, I think we're being watched," he said, his voice tense. Marconi joined him at the window, her face pale. "We need to be careful. If someone knows we have this box, they won't stop until they get it." Riley nodded, his mind racing. The stakes were higher than he had anticipated. As they continued their research, He realized that the battle between angels and demons was not just a metaphorical struggle. The forces of good and evil were very real, and they were closing in. Chapter 3. The Templar Connection. The weight of their discovery hung heavily in the air as Riley and Marconi delved deeper into their research. Hours turned into days, and the intricate carvings on the box began to reveal their secrets. Each symbol was a piece of a larger puzzle, leading them to a shocking conclusion. The box was a key not just metaphorically but literally. It was designed to open a hidden vault believed to contain ancient artifacts and documents of immense power. One evening, as they pored over their findings, Marconi looked up with a start. "John, look at this," she said, pointing to a passage in an old Templar manuscript. "It mentions a sanctuary of angels, a secret chamber said to be located beneath a cathedral in France. The box fits the description of the key needed to access it." Riley's pulse quickened. "If we can find this sanctuary, we might uncover the truth behind the manuscript and the battle between angels and demons." Marconi nodded. "But we have to be cautious. If word gets out about our discovery, we could be in grave danger." Determined to proceed, Riley and Marconi made plans to travel to France. They kept their destination secret, aware that their every move might be monitored. As they prepared for the journey, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He had seen the shadowy figure multiple times, always lurking just out of sight. Their flight to France was uneventful, but the tension between them was palpable. Upon arrival, they rented a car and drove to the small town of Chartres, home to the renowned Chartres Cathedral. The town was picturesque, with cobblestone streets and historic buildings, but Riley's mind was focused on the task at hand. They arrived at the cathedral just before dusk. The grandeur of the structure was awe-inspiring, its Gothic spires reaching towards the heavens. As they walked through the massive doors, Riley felt a chill run down his spine. The air inside was cool and heavy with centuries of history. Following the clues from the manuscript, they made their way to the crypt beneath the cathedral. The dimly lit space was eerily quiet, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Riley's heart pounded as he held the box in his hands, searching for the right spot to insert it. "There," Marconi whispered, pointing to a small indentation in the wall. Riley approached and carefully placed the box in the opening. With a soft click, the wall began to shift, revealing a hidden passageway. They exchanged a glance, a mix of excitement and apprehension. As they stepped into the darkness, Riley couldn't help but wonder what awaited them. The secrets of the past were about to be unveiled, and the battle between angels and demons was closer than ever. Chapter 4. The Sanctuary of Angels. The passageway was narrow and winding, the walls lined with ancient symbols and carvings. Riley and Marconi moved cautiously, their flashlights casting eerie shadows. The air grew colder as they descended, the sense of foreboding intensifying with each step. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling arched high above them, supported by intricately carved pillars. At the center of the room stood an ornate altar, adorned with relics and statues of angels and demons locked in eternal combat. Riley's breath caught in his throat. "This must be the Sanctuary of Angels," he whispered, awestruck by the sight. Marconi approached the altar, her eyes wide with wonder. "Look at these artifacts, John. They date back centuries, maybe even millennia." As they examined the relics, Riley noticed a large, ancient book resting on the altar. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. He opened it carefully, revealing text written in a blend of Latin and symbols similar to those on the box. "This is it," Riley said, his voice trembling with excitement. "This book might hold the answers we've been searching for." Before they could delve into the text, a sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps. Riley and Marconi exchanged a panicked glance, realizing they were not alone. They quickly extinguished their flashlights, plunging the chamber into darkness. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by hushed voices. Riley strained to hear, catching snippets of a conversation in a language he couldn't identify. He felt Marconi's hand on his arm, her grip tight with fear. Suddenly, the chamber was flooded with light. Riley squinted, his eyes adjusting to the brightness. A group of figures stood at the entrance, their faces obscured by hoods. At their forefront was a tall man with piercing blue eyes, his expression cold and calculating. "You have something that belongs to us," the man said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Hand over the box and the book, and we might let you live." Riley's mind raced. They were trapped, outnumbered, and outmatched. He knew they couldn't fight their way out, but he also couldn't let the book and the box fall into the wrong hands. "Run!" he whispered to Marconi, grabbing her hand. They sprinted towards the far end of the chamber, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The hooded figures gave chase, their shouts filling the air. Riley and Marconi reached a narrow passageway, slipping through just as their pursuers closed in. They raced through the darkness, desperate to escape the labyrinthine tunnels. The sound of their pursuers faded, but Riley knew they weren't safe yet. As they emerged into the night, Riley felt a surge of relief. They had escaped the chamber, but the battle was far from over. The secrets they had uncovered were more dangerous than they had imagined, and powerful forces were determined to keep those secrets hidden. Chapter 5. A Deadly Alliance. Riley and Marconi didn't stop running until they reached the outskirts of Chartres. Gasping for breath, they took refuge in a small, abandoned shed, hidden among the overgrown bushes. Riley clutched the ancient book to his chest, his mind racing with thoughts of their narrow escape. "We can't stay here," Marconi said, her voice trembling. "They'll find us." Riley nodded. "We need to figure out our next move. This book contains answers, but we can't decode it here." They decided to reach out to an old ally, someone who could help them without attracting too much attention. Riley used a burner phone to contact Professor Michael Davenport, a trusted friend and expert in ancient languages. Davenport agreed to meet them in a secluded location outside Paris. The journey to Paris was fraught with tension. Riley and Marconi traveled separately, taking different routes to avoid detection. Every stranger seemed like a potential threat, every shadow a hiding place for their pursuers. Riley's nerves were frayed by the time he arrived at the rendezvous point, a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Davenport greeted them warmly but with a hint of concern in his eyes. "John, Isabella, what have you gotten yourselves into?" Riley handed him the book. "We need your help, Michael. This manuscript holds the key to an ancient battle between angels and demons, but we're being hunted by a group that wants it for their own purposes." Davenport's eyes widened as he examined the book. "This is extraordinary. I've seen references to such texts, but never one in person. If this is genuine, it could change everything we know about history and theology." As they discussed their findings, Riley noticed a figure lurking outside the cafe. His heart sank. "Michael, we need to leave. Now." Davenport nodded, quickly packing up the book and his notes. They exited through the back, slipping into the narrow alleyways of Paris. Riley led the way, navigating the labyrinthine streets with a sense of urgency. They had to stay ahead of their pursuers. Just as they thought they had lost their tail, a black van screeched to a halt in front of them. Armed men poured out, surrounding them. Riley recognized the man with the piercing blue eyes from the chamber. He stepped forward, a sinister smile on his face. "You can't run forever, Professor Riley," he said. "Hand over the book and the box, or your friends will suffer the consequences." Riley glanced at Marconi and Davenport, their faces pale with fear. He knew they were out of options, but he couldn't give up the knowledge they had uncovered. He had to think of something, fast. "Wait," Riley said, raising his hands. "We'll give you the book. Just let my friends go." The man smirked. "You're in no position to negotiate. but I'll consider it a gesture of goodwill." Riley handed over the book, his heart sinking. As the man took it, Riley saw a flicker of movement behind him. In a blur, a figure tackled the man, sending him sprawling. It was Marconi, her eyes blazing with determination. "Run!" she shouted, grabbing the book and tossing it to Davenport. "Go, John. We'll hold them off." Riley hesitated, torn between helping his friends and escaping. But he knew they were right. The knowledge they had was too important. With a heavy heart, he turned and fled, Davenport close behind. As they disappeared into the night, Riley vowed to return for his friends. The battle between angels and demons was far from over, and he would need all the help he could get to uncover the truth and save those he cared about. Chapter 6. The Secret Alliance. Riley and Davenport didn't stop until they were miles away from the cafe. Hiding in a remote safe house Davenport had secured years ago for emergencies. The place was small but well-stocked, a perfect hideaway while they regrouped. "We can't leave Marconi behind," Riley said, pacing the small living room. "We need to go back and rescue her." Davenport nodded. "I agree, but we need a plan. We can't take on those men without help." Riley slumped into a chair, running a hand through his hair. "There must be someone who can help us. Someone who understands the stakes." Davenport thought for a moment. "There might be one person. An old friend of mine, Lucien Arnaud. He's an expert in ancient societies and has connections with groups that oppose these shadowy organizations. If anyone can help us, it's him." They contacted Arnaud, explaining their predicament. He agreed to meet them at a discreet location in the French countryside. With no time to waste, Riley and Davenport made their way to the meeting point, hopeful that Arnaud could provide the assistance they desperately needed. When they arrived, they were greeted by a tall, stern-looking man with a shock of white hair. Lucien Arnaud extended a hand. "John Riley, Michael Davenport. I've heard of your work. If what you say is true, we're facing a threat unlike any other." Riley nodded. "We need your help, Lucien. They have Marconi and the box. If they decode the book, who knows what they could unleash." Arnaud led them into a dimly lit room filled with maps and documents. "I've been tracking these groups for years. They operate in the shadows, manipulating events to serve their own ends. But there's a resistance, a secret alliance dedicated to stopping them. We call ourselves the Guardians of the Light." Riley felt a surge of hope. "Can you help us rescue Marconi and stop them from unlocking the secrets of the book?" Arnaud's eyes hardened. "We can, but it won't be easy. They are well-organized and ruthless. We'll need to strike fast and hard before they realize we're onto them." With Arnaud's guidance, they formulated a plan to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold. Riley felt a mixture of fear and determination. The stakes were higher than ever, but he couldn't let Marconi down. They would face the darkness together, and with luck, they would emerge victorious. As they prepared for the mission, Riley glanced at the ancient symbols on the maps and documents. The battle between angels and demons was not just a metaphor. It was a reality that had shaped human history for centuries. And now it was up to them to ensure that the light would prevail. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. Under the cover of darkness, Riley, Davenport, and Arnaud moved swiftly towards the enemy's stronghold. The remote chateau loomed ominously against the night sky, its ancient stone walls hiding secrets that spanned centuries. Arnaud's team, the Guardians of the Light, were strategically positioned, ready to strike. Riley's heart pounded as they approached the entrance. "Remember, we need to get Marconi and the box without drawing too much attention," he whispered to Davenport and Arnaud. They slipped through a hidden passage, guided by Arnaud's intimate knowledge of the chateau's layout. As they navigated the narrow corridors, Riley's thoughts were consumed by Marconi. He hoped she was unharmed, her spirit unbroken. They reached a heavy wooden door guarded by two men. Arnaud's team moved silently, taking down the guards with precision. Riley pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit room where Marconi was bound to a chair. Her face lit up with relief when she saw them. "John!" she exclaimed, tears of joy in her eyes. Riley rushed to her side, cutting her bonds. "Are you okay?" Marconi nodded, her expression determined. "They've been trying to force me to decode the book, but I stalled them as long as I could." Arnaud motioned for them to hurry. "We need to find the box and the book before they realize we're here." They moved quickly through the chateau, encountering minimal resistance thanks to the Guardians' diversion tactics. Finally, they reached a grand hall where the man with piercing blue eyes stood, the book and box on a pedestal behind him. He smirked as they entered. "So predictable," he sneered. "Did you really think you could outsmart us?" Riley felt a surge of anger. "We're taking the book and the box. You won't stop us." The man laughed, drawing a gun. "You underestimate the power we possess. The secrets within that book will give us control over the very fabric of existence." Before he could fire, Arnaud's team launched their attack. The room erupted in chaos, gunfire echoing off the stone walls. Riley and Marconi moved towards the pedestal, dodging bullets and debris. Davenport covered them, his determination unwavering. Riley reached the book, but as he grabbed it, the man lunged at him, knocking it from his hands. They struggled, the book slipping across the floor. Marconi retrieved the box, her eyes scanning for a way out. "John, we need to go," she shouted. Riley broke free, grabbing the book and sprinting towards Marconi. The man aimed his gun, but before he could fire, Arnaud tackled him, disarming him with a swift motion. "We have to destroy the book and the box," Arnaud yelled. "It's the only way to stop them." Riley hesitated, the weight of centuries of knowledge in his hands. But he knew Arnaud was right. They couldn't allow such power to fall into the wrong hands. With a heavy heart, Riley and Marconi smashed the box against the stone floor, its intricate carvings shattering. Arnaud took the book, setting it ablaze with a nearby torch. The man with piercing blue eyes screamed in rage, his plans unraveling before him. As the book burned, the chateau began to tremble. The ancient forces contained within it were being released, the balance between angels and demons restored. The Guardians of the Light ushered Riley, Marconi, and Davenport out, the chateau collapsing in their wake. Outside, they watched as the chateau crumbled, its secrets buried forever. The battle between good and evil had reached a turning point, but Riley knew it was far from over. The world was a fragile place, and the forces that sought to control it would always pose a threat. But for now, they had won, and with the Guardians of the Light, they would continue to protect the world from those who sought to disrupt the delicate balance between angels and demons. The end. The Girl in the Mist, Chapter 1. The Disappearance. Fog rolled through the quaint seaside town of Gravenhist like a whisper, weaving through the narrow streets and over the rooftops, masking everything in a damp shroud. To outsiders, Gravenhist was a picturesque haven, but for the residents, the mist was a part of their lives, an ever-present, almost sentient entity. Kara Holden woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. The remnants of a nightmare clung to her like cobwebs. She tried to recall the details, something about running through the mist, a shadowy figure chasing her, but it slipped away as soon as she reached for it. Shaking her head, she pushed the damp strands of her dark hair away from her face and glanced at the clock. 3:47 a.m. She sighed, knowing that sleep would not return easily. Slipping out of bed, Kara padded to the kitchen, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She poured herself a glass of water, staring out of the window at the dense fog that cloaked the street outside. The mist seemed thicker than usual, almost oppressive. She shivered, though the kitchen was warm. As she sipped her water, she thought about the day ahead. It was supposed to be her day off, a rare luxury in her busy schedule as a nurse at the local hospital. She had planned to spend it reading and catching up on chores, But now an uneasy feeling gnawed at her. Something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had settled over her. The shrill ring of her phone broke the silence, startling her so much that she nearly dropped the glass. Setting it down, she grabbed her phone from the counter. The screen displayed the name of her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who rarely called, especially at this hour. "Hello," Kara answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Kara, it's Emily. I didn't know who else to call. It's Becca. She's gone." Kara's stomach dropped. Becca was Emily's teenage granddaughter who had recently moved in with her. Kara had grown fond of the girl over the past few months, often helping her with homework and offering a listening ear. "Gone? What do you mean?" Kara asked, her voice rising with alarm. "She didn't come home last night. I thought maybe she was with friends, but I called everyone I could think of. No one has seen her." Kara felt a chill run down her spine. "Have you called the police?" "Yes, but you know how it is. They said they can't do anything until she's been missing for 24 hours. Kara cursed under her breath. Small towns had their own set of rules, and the local police were notoriously slow to act. "I'll come over," she said firmly. "We'll figure this out." She hung up and quickly dressed, pulling on a thick sweater and jeans. As she slipped on her boots, she tried to push down the rising panic. Becca was a responsible girl, not the type to disappear without a word. Something was very wrong. Outside, the mist was a living, breathing thing, wrapping around her as she stepped onto the street. The cold, damp air clung to her skin, making her shiver. Kara hurried down the street, her mind racing with possibilities. As she reached Emily's house, she saw the older woman standing on the porch, her face pale and drawn. "Kara, thank God you're here," Emily said, her voice trembling. "We'll find her, Emily," Kara said, more confidently than she felt. "Let's start by retracing her steps." They went inside, and Emily showed her to Becca's room. It was neat and tidy, nothing out of place. Kara's eyes were drawn to a notebook on the desk. She picked it up and flipped through the pages, finding nothing unusual, until she reached the last entry. "Meet at the old lighthouse. Midnight. Don't tell anyone." Kara's heart skipped a beat. The old lighthouse was a crumbling structure on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and rumored to be haunted. No one went there, especially not at night. "Emily, did Becca mention anything about the lighthouse?" she asked, holding up the notebook. Emily shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No, never. Why would she go there?" "I don't know," Kara said, dread settling in her stomach. "But we need to find out." Chapter 2. The Lighthouse. The path to the old lighthouse was treacherous, especially with the thick fog that clung to the landscape like a veil. Kara and Emily moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the mist in thin beams. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore. Kara's thoughts raced as they walked. Why had Becca gone to the lighthouse? And who had she been meeting? The questions buzzed in her mind, each one more unsettling than the last. They reached the lighthouse, its imposing silhouette looming out of the fog. The structure was dilapidated, its paint peeling and windows broken. The door hung ajar, creaking slightly in the breeze. Kara felt a shiver run down her spine as they approached. "Becca?" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. There was no response. Kara pushed the door open wider, and they stepped inside. The air was damp and musty, filled with the scent of decay. Their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls as they moved through the rooms, calling Becca's name. In the main room, they found signs of recent activity. An old, tattered blanket was spread out on the floor, and a few empty cans of soda were scattered around. Kara's heart pounded in her chest. Becca had been here. "Look," Emily said, pointing to a small notebook lying on the blanket. Kara picked it up and flipped through the pages. It was Becca's handwriting, filled with notes and doodles. But one page stood out. It was a list of names with Becca's circled in red. Beneath it were the words, "The Mist Society." Kara's blood ran cold. She had heard whispers of a secret group in town, rumored to engage in strange rituals and activities, but she had always dismissed them as urban legends. Could Becca have gotten involved with them? "We need to go to the police," Emily said, her voice shaking. "This is bigger than us." Kara nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. The police were slow to act, and she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. She looked at the list of names again, memorizing them. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm. "But I'm not stopping until I find her." As they left the lighthouse, Kara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced back over her shoulder, but saw nothing through the thick fog. Still, the sensation of unseen eyes lingered, making her quicken her pace. Back at Emily's house, they called the police again, explaining what they had found. The officer on duty sounded skeptical but promised to send someone out in the morning. Kara felt a surge of frustration. Morning might be too late. After the call, she sat down with Emily, spreading the notebook and list of names on the table. "We need to figure out who these people are," she said. "If Becca got involved with this Mist Society, they might know where she is." Emily nodded, though she looked exhausted and overwhelmed. "Where do we start?" "With the names," Kara said. "We find out who they are and we talk to them. Someone must know something." They spent the next few hours cross-referencing the names with the town's public records and social media. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Most of the names belonged to teenagers and young adults, many of whom had been reported missing over the past few years. Kara's heart sank as she realized the scope of what they were dealing with. "This is a cult," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're taking our children." Kara nodded grimly. "And we need to stop them." As dawn approached, they had compiled a list of addresses and phone numbers. Kara looked at Emily, her resolve hardening. "I'll start visiting these addresses. You stay here and keep calling the numbers. We can't let this go." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Bring her home, Kara. Please." "I will," Kara promised, grabbing her coat and heading out into the early morning mist. The fog was beginning to lift, but the sense of foreboding remained. Kara knew they were up against something dark and dangerous, but she couldn't let fear stop her. She would find Becca no matter what it took. Chapter 3: Unraveling Secrets. Kara's first stop was a small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. The lawn was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters was peeling. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door, her heart pounding. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a young man with disheveled hair and bloodshot eyes. He looked at her warily. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Becca Peterson," Kara said, her voice firm. "She went missing last night, and I found her name linked to something called the Mist Society. Do you know anything about it?" The man's eyes widened in surprise, and he glanced around nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly, starting to close the door. Kara jammed her foot in the gap, stopping him. "Please, I just want to find her. If you know anything." "I said I don't know," he snapped, but there was fear in his eyes. "Now leave, before you get us both in trouble." Kara stepped back, allowing the door to slam shut. She stood on the porch for a moment, frustration boiling inside her. He knew something. She was sure of it, but fear was keeping him silent. She moved on to the next address, a modest apartment building near the town center. The woman who answered the door was in her mid-20s, with tired eyes and a wary expression. Kara introduced herself and explained the situation. "Becca?" the woman said, frowning. "I think I saw her with my sister a few days ago. My sister, Rachel, she's been involved with some weird group lately. I keep telling her to stay away, but she won't listen." Kara's heart leaped. "Do you know where I can find Rachel?" The woman hesitated, then sighed. She's probably at the old factory on the edge of town. That's where they usually meet. Kara thanked her and hurried back to her car. The old factory was a crumbling relic of Gravenhist's industrial past, long abandoned and left to decay. It was the perfect place for a secretive group to gather without attracting attention. As she approached the factory, Kara's unease grew. The building loomed ahead, its broken windows like dark eyes watching her. She parked a short distance away and approached on foot, her flashlight cutting through the lingering mist. The front entrance was locked, but she found a side door that had been forced open. Stepping inside, she was greeted by the sound of murmured voices echoing through the empty halls. She moved cautiously, her footsteps silent on the concrete floor. The voices grew louder as she approached a large room at the back of the building. Peering through a crack in the door, she saw a group of people gathered around a makeshift altar. At the center stood a tall man with a commanding presence, his face obscured by shadows. "Welcome, my followers," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. "Tonight, we are joined by a new member. Becca, step forward." Kara's breath caught in her throat as she saw Becca emerge from the group, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She wore a long white robe, and her hands were bound in front of her. "As you take this step, you join us in our mission to transcend the boundaries of this world," the man continued, "to become one with the mist and to harness its power." Kara's mind raced. She had to get Becca out of there, but she couldn't do it alone. She pulled out her phone and texted Emily, giving her the location and urging her to call the police again. As she slipped the phone back into her pocket, the door creaked slightly, and the man looked up. Kara froze, her heart pounding. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw a flash of recognition in his gaze. "Intruder!" he shouted, pointing toward the door. The group turned, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. Kara bolted, sprinting down the hallway as footsteps thundered behind her. She reached the side door and burst outside, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. As she fumbled with the keys, she saw figures emerging from the factory, their flashlights slicing through the mist. She managed to get the car started and sped away, her mind racing. She had found Becca, but now they knew she was onto them, and they wouldn't stop until they silenced her. Chapter 4. The Pursuit. Kara's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she drove through the mist-covered streets. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. She glanced at her phone, hoping for a response from Emily or the police, but there was nothing yet. The headlights cut through the fog, casting eerie shadows on the buildings as she made her way back to Emily's house. She needed to regroup and figure out their next move. She couldn't let Becca fall into the hands of that cult. As she pulled into Emily's driveway, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Emily. "Police are on their way. Be careful." Kara felt a surge of relief. At least now they had some backup. She hurried inside, finding Emily pacing the living room, her face etched with worry. "Did you find her?" Emily asked, rushing to Kara's side. "Yes, but they're holding some kind of ritual at the old factory," Kara said, her voice urgent. "We need to get her out of there before it's too late." Emily's eyes widened in fear. "What are we going to do?" "We wait for the police," Kara said, trying to sound confident. "But we need to be ready to move as soon as they arrive." They spent the next agonizing minutes watching the clock, every second stretching out interminably. Finally, the sound of sirens cut through the silence, and red and blue lights flashed outside. Kara and Emily rushed out to meet the officers. Kara quickly explained the situation, and the officers nodded, their expressions serious. "We'll need you to show us the way," one of them said. They piled into the police cars, and Kara led the convoy back to the old factory. The fog had thinned slightly, but the sense of foreboding remained. As they approached the building, The officers drew their weapons, moving cautiously toward the entrance. Kara's heart pounded as they entered the factory. The voices were louder now, chanting in a language she didn't understand. The officers motioned for her and Emily to stay back as they moved forward, their flashlights illuminating the dark corridors. The chanting grew louder as they approached the large room at the back. Kara's pulse quickened. They were running out of time. She could hear Becca's voice now, her cries for help mingling with the chanting. The officers burst into the room, their shouts echoing off the walls. The group scattered, their ritual interrupted. Kara and Emily rushed in behind them, their eyes scanning the room for Becca. There she was, still bound and standing near the altar, her eyes wide with fear. Kara ran to her, quickly untying the ropes. "It's okay, Becca. We're getting you out of here." Becca collapsed into her arms, sobbing. "Thank you, Kara. I was so scared." The officers subdued the cult members, handcuffing them and reading their rights. The leader, the tall man from earlier, glared at Kara with a look of pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. "The Mist Society is everywhere. You can't stop us." Kara ignored him, focusing on Becca. "Let's get you home," she said softly, guiding her toward the exit. As they emerged from the factory, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the mist, casting a pale light over the town. Kara took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. They had saved Becca, but the threat of the Mist Society still loomed large. Back at Emily's house, they sat down with the officers to give their statements. Becca recounted her ordeal, her voice shaking. "They told me I would gain special powers, that I would become one with the mist," she said. "But it was all lies. They were using us for their own purposes." Kara listened, her mind racing. The cult's reach was deeper than she had realized. They needed to find a way to dismantle it for good. As the officers left, promising to continue their investigation, Kara and Emily sat in the living room, exhausted but relieved. Becca was safe, but the fight was far from over. "We did it," Emily said, her voice filled with gratitude. "We got her back." Kara nodded, but her thoughts were already turning to the future. The Mist Society was still out there, and she couldn't rest until it was destroyed. Chapter 5. The Unseen Threat. Kara barely slept that night. She kept reliving the moment when she locked eyes with the cult leader, his words echoing in her mind. The Mist Society is everywhere. As dawn broke, she knew she couldn't leave it at that. She had to dig deeper and find a way to expose and dismantle the cult for good. She headed to the hospital where she worked, hoping to clear her mind with routine tasks. But even amidst the controlled chaos of the emergency room, her thoughts kept drifting back to the factory, to Becca, and to the looming threat that still hung over Gravenhist. During a rare lull, Kara pulled out her phone and did a quick search on the Mist Society. Most of what she found were rumors and conspiracy theories, nothing concrete. But one link caught her eye, an article about a series of disappearances in a nearby town, with whispers of a shadowy group involved. The pattern was eerily similar to what she had seen in Gravenhist. She forwarded the article to Emily and Becca, then grabbed a quick cup of coffee before heading back to work. As she dealt with patients, she noticed a familiar face in the waiting room. It was the young man from the dilapidated house, the one who had tried to slam the door in her face. His eyes met hers, and he looked away quickly, but not before she saw the fear in them. Kara's heart raced. What was he doing here? Was he a victim, or was he still involved with the Mist Society? As soon as she had a moment, she approached him. "You're the one I spoke to about Becca," she said quietly. "Why are you here?" He glanced around nervously. "I need help," he whispered. "I tried to get out, but they won't let me. They said if I leave, they'll come after me and my family." Kara felt a surge of sympathy. "What's your name?" she asked. "Nick," he said, glancing around again. "I need to disappear. Can you help me? Come with me, Kara said, leading him to a more private area. She called Emily and explained the situation, asking her to meet them at her house. "We'll figure something out," she told Nick. "But you need to tell us everything you know about the Mist Society." When they arrived at Kara's house, Emily was already there, her face tense with worry. Becca was upstairs, resting, still shaken from her ordeal. Kara quickly filled Emily in on Nick's situation, and they sat down at the kitchen table. "Tell us what you know," Kara said, looking at Nick. He took a deep breath. "The Mist Society has been around for years. They lure people in with promises of power and enlightenment. But it's all a lie. They use us for their own gain, and if anyone tries to leave, they make sure they regret it." "Who's behind it?" Emily asked. "Who's the leader?" "His name is David Hale," Nick said. "He's the one you saw at the factory. He's dangerous and he has connections everywhere. Even the police are afraid of him." Kara's mind raced. "We need to find a way to expose him," she said, "to show the world what he's doing." Nick nodded. "I can get you evidence, but you'll need to protect me. Once they know I'm talking, they'll come after me." "We'll keep you safe," Emily said firmly. "Just tell us what you need." Chapter 6. The Trap. Over the next few days, Nick provided Kara and Emily with detailed information about the Mist Society. He gave them names, locations, and even some of the rituals they performed. Kara took meticulous notes, her determination growing with each new revelation. They decided to compile all the evidence and present it to a journalist who had been investigating local corruption. If they could get the story out, they could put enough pressure on the authorities to act. But they needed to be careful. David Hale had eyes and ears everywhere. One evening, as they were going over their plans, Becca came downstairs, looking pale but determined. "I want to help," she said. "I know what they did to me, and I don't want anyone else to go through that." Kara and Emily exchanged worried glances. "It's too dangerous," Kara said gently. "You've been through enough." "But I can give you more information," Becca insisted. "I remember things, details that might be important." Kara sighed. "All right, but you have to promise to stay safe. No taking risks." Becca nodded, and they sat down together, piecing together the final parts of their plan. Nick would get them the evidence they needed, and Becca would provide additional details. Then they would contact the journalist and arrange a meeting. The night before the meeting, Kara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, her nerves on edge. Emily stayed up with her, both of them too anxious to sleep. In the early hours of the morning, a noise outside made Kara's heart leap into her throat. She peered through the curtains and saw a shadowy figure moving through the mist. She grabbed her phone and called the police, whispering their location. "Stay quiet," she told Emily and Becca. "Someone's outside." They waited in tense silence, the minutes dragging by. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and the figure outside fled. Kara breathed a sigh of relief as the police arrived, their flashlights cutting through the fog. After a thorough search, the officers confirmed that the figure was gone. "We'll keep an eye on the house," one of them said. "But be careful. Whoever it was might come back." Kara nodded, her resolve hardening. They were getting close, and Hale was getting desperate. They needed to move quickly. The next day, they met the journalist at a small cafe on the edge of town. Kara handed over the evidence, her hands shaking slightly. "This is everything we have," she said. "You need to get this out there to expose them." The journalist, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression, nodded. "I'll do everything I can," she promised. "But you need to be careful. Once this goes public, they'll come after you." "We know," Emily said, "but we can't let them get away with this." As they left the cafe, Kara felt a mix of fear and hope. They had taken a huge risk, but it was the only way to bring the Mist Society down. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that the truth would finally come to light. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Kara, Emily, and Becca stayed vigilant, their nerves frayed as they waited for the journalist's story to break. Nick remained hidden, constantly watching for any signs that the Mist Society might be closing in on him. Finally, the morning arrived when the article was published. The headline was bold and accusatory: Cult in the Mist, uncovering Gravenhist's dark secret. The story detailed the disappearances, the rituals, and the sinister influence of David Hale and his followers. It was a damning exposé, backed by the evidence they had provided. Kara sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper spread out before her. She felt a mixture of relief and fear. They had done it, they had exposed the Mist Society. But now they had to brace for the fallout. As the day went on, the town buzzed with the news. Social media was flooded with reactions, and people began to come forward with their own stories. It was clear that the Mist Society's grip on Gravenhist was loosening, but it also meant that Hale and his followers would be more desperate than ever. Late that afternoon, Kara received a call from the police. "We've made several arrests based on the information you provided," the officer said. "But Hale is still at large. We're doing everything we can to find him." Kara's heart sank. As long as Hale was free, they weren't truly safe. She relayed the news to Emily and Becca, and they spent the evening making sure the house was secure. As night fell, Kara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She double-checked the locks again, then sat down with Emily and Becca in the living room, each of them lost in their thoughts. A sudden loud noise shattered the silence. They jumped up, their hearts racing. The front door burst open, and there stood David Hale, his eyes wild with fury. Behind him were two of his followers, their faces set with grim determination. "You thought you could expose us and get away with it?" Hale snarled, stepping inside. "You've ruined everything." Kara's mind raced. They were trapped, outnumbered. She had to think fast. "It's over, Hale," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The police are coming for you. It's only a matter of time." Hale laughed, a cold, menacing sound. "I don't think so. We're leaving and you're coming with us. We can't let you spread any more lies." He motioned for his followers to grab them. Kara, Emily, and Becca backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Just as Hale's men reached for them, there was a sudden flash of lights outside, followed by the sound of car doors slamming. "Police, drop your weapons and come out with your hands up." Hale's face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed, before turning and running out the back door, his followers close behind. The police stormed in, their guns drawn. Kara felt a surge of relief as they were quickly surrounded by officers. "Are you all right?" one of them asked. "We're fine," Kara said, her voice shaking. Hale and his men went out the back. "You have to catch them." The officers nodded and took off in pursuit. Kara, Emily, and Becca were escorted outside, where they watched the chaos unfold. The air was filled with the sound of sirens and shouting as the police fanned out, searching for Hale. After what felt like an eternity, they heard the news. "We got him," an officer said, walking over to them. "Hale is in custody, along with several of his followers. It's over." Kara felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was really over. The Mist Society was finished, and David Hale was finally behind bars. Epilogue. New beginnings. In the weeks that followed, Gravenhist began to heal. The story of the Mist Society had made national headlines, and there was a renewed sense of unity in the town. People came together to support the victims and rebuild the community. Kara, Emily, and Becca tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. Becca began therapy to deal with her trauma, and Kara continued her work at the hospital. Emily, ever the community organizer, helped set up support groups for those affected by the cult. One evening, as they sat together on Kara's porch, They reflected on everything that had happened. "We did it," Emily said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "We stopped them." Kara nodded. "But we couldn't have done it without each other. We're stronger together." Becca smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I feel like I can finally breathe again," she said. "Thank you, both of you, for not giving up on me." Kara put her arm around Becca's shoulders. "We'll always be here for you," she said, "no matter what." As the sun set over Gravenhist, casting a warm glow over the town, Kara felt a sense of peace. The mist had finally lifted, and the future looked brighter than ever. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.